In the scorching heat of the afternoon, the air shimmers above a dusty alley in a remote neighborhood. A young paramedic, gloved hands moving quickly, runs toward a fence wrapped in barbed wire. Among dry leaves, a German shepherd entangled in sharp wires whimpers weakly. In silence, the paramedic starts cutting the wires, ignoring the sound of a distant ambulance. In the background, a man with a cold stare hides behind a wall, watching without moving. The ambulance sound fades. The paramedic loses focus. The blade slips. In the flash, a baby is placed beside the injured dog, and for 1 second, everything stopped. Love animal stories? Then subscribe now and never miss one. Thanks for joining us. Now, back to our story. The scorching July heat pressed down on Millbrook, Tennessee like a heavy blanket, making the air shimmer above the cracked pavement of Maple Street. Sarah Mitchell wiped the sweat from her forehead as she tended to her garden. The usual afternoon quietness of their small community, broken only by the distant hum of air conditioning units working overtime. It was the kind of day where even the birds seemed too tired to sing, seeking refuge in whatever shade they could find. Then came the sound that would change everything. A piercing, desperate howl cut through the sultry air, so filled with anguish that Sarah dropped her watering can, sending water splashing across her prized tomatoes. The cry was unmistakably canine, but there was something in its tone that spoke of pure terror and pain. It echoed between the modest houses of their neighborhood, bouncing off porches and through screen doors, demanding attention from anyone within earshot. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, who had been sweeping her front porch 3 houses down, stopped mid-motion and looked toward the sound. Even old Mr. Peterson, who was known for his afternoon naps on his recliner, emerged from his house with a concerned expression. The howling continued, growing more frantic with each passing second. Sarah's training as a veterinary technician kicked in immediately. She had heard enough animals in distress to recognize genuine emergency when she heard it. Without hesitation, she grabbed her phone and dialed the number she knew by heart. "Jake, we've got a situation on Cedar Lane," she said as soon as her brother picked up. Jake Mitchell was the captain of Millbrook's volunteer rescue unit, a small but dedicated team that handled everything from stranded hikers to animal emergencies in their rural community. What kind of situation? Jake's voice carried the calm authority that had made him a natural leader among the volunteers. Animal in distress. Sounds like a large dog, maybe German shepherd. The crying is getting worse, Jake. This isn't normal. There was a brief pause before Jake responded. "I'm grabbing Mike and heading out. Can you meet us there?" "Already on my way." Sarah slipped on her shoes and hurried toward the sound, which seemed to be coming from the overgrown lot behind the Henderson property. The Henderson family had moved to Nashville 6 months ago, leaving their backyard to nature's whims. What had once been a neat garden was now a tangle of weeds, abandoned garden tools, and unfortunately remnants of old fencing that should have been removed long ago. As she pushed through the tall grass, the howling grew louder and more heartbreaking. Sarah's heart clenched as she finally spotted the source of the commotion. A beautiful German shepherd, his golden and black coat matted with sweat and dirt, was trapped in a cruel embrace of rusted barbed wire. The more he struggled to free himself, the deeper the barbs seemed to dig into his fur and skin. "Oh, sweetie," Sarah whispered, her voice soft but steady. She had learned long ago that animals in pain could be unpredictable, but this dog's eyes held intelligence and desperation rather than aggression. "We're going to help you, I promise." The dog's amber eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment his frantic struggling ceased. It was as if he understood that help had arrived. But then another wave of panic took over, and he resumed his desperate attempts to escape, each movement making his situation worse. Sarah kept her distance, knowing better than to approach alone. The sound of truck engines and slamming doors announced the arrival of the rescue team. Jake appeared first, his tall frame moving with practiced efficiency as he assessed the situation. Behind him came Mike Rodriguez, the team's equipment specialist, carrying a bag of tools that looked like it could handle any emergency. "How long has he been like this?" Jake asked, his experienced eyes already calculating the best approach. "I'm not sure. I only heard him about 10 minutes ago, but given how tangled he is, it could have been much longer." Sarah watched as Jake moved slowly around the perimeter, studying the wire configuration. Mike set down his bag and pulled out wire cutters, work gloves, and what looked like a small tarp. "This is going to take some time. The wires wrapped around him in at least 4 different places, and we can't just cut randomly or we might make it worse." The German shepherd continued his mournful howling, and Sarah noticed how the sound seemed to carry an unusual urgency. In her years of working with animals, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to read their distress signals. This wasn't just fear or pain. There was something else, something that felt almost like a call for help that went beyond his own predicament. As if summoned by her thoughts, the distant wail of an ambulance siren began to echo across Millbrook. It was heading toward the county hospital, which sat just 2 miles down the main road. The timing struck Sarah as oddly coincidental, but she pushed the thought aside. Right now, her focus needed to be on the trapped animal before them. Jake was already formulating a plan, his military background evident in the methodical way he approached the problem. "Mike, we need to stabilize him first. If he keeps thrashing like this, we'll never get him free safely. Sarah, do you have any of those sedatives from the clinic?" "Not with me, but I could call Dr. Patterson. He might be able to bring something." "Over?" Sarah was already reaching for her phone when something in the dog's behavior made her pause. The German shepherd had stopped struggling again, but this time his attention wasn't focused on the humans trying to help him. His head was turned toward the direction of the hospital, his ears perked forward as if he was listening to something none of them could hear. The ambulance siren had faded, but the dog remained alert, almost vigilant. "That's strange," Mike observed, following the dog's gaze. "It's like he knows something we don't." Jake nodded, having noticed the same thing. Animals have senses we can't even imagine. Maybe he's picking up on something. He looked back at his trapped patient. "But right now, we need to focus on getting him out of this mess." As they prepared their tools and discussed the safest approach, none of them could have predicted that their afternoon rescue mission was about to become intertwined with a crisis happening just 2 miles away. The German shepherd's persistent gaze toward the hospital seemed to suggest he somehow knew that his fate was connected to whatever emergency had just arrived at Millbrook County Medical Center. The July heat continued to beat down on them, making their work more challenging, but the rescue team was determined. They had no way of knowing that their careful planning was about to be tested by obstacles they never could have anticipated, or that someone was watching their every move with eyes full of old hurt and bitter memories. Walter Hartman watched from behind the weathered fence that separated the Henderson property from the maintenance shed where he stored his groundskeeping equipment. His weathered hands gripped the chain link so tightly that his knuckles had turned white, and his jaw was set in a hard line that spoke of years of accumulated resentment. At 62, Walter had been the unofficial caretaker of the abandoned lots and empty properties in this part of Millbrook for over a decade. It was work that suited his solitary nature, requiring minimal interaction with the residents, who seemed to view him as little more than part of the landscape. He preferred it that way. People asked too many questions, showed too much concern, wanted to know things that were better left buried in the past. But dogs were different. Dogs brought back memories he'd spent 20 years trying to forget. The German shepherd's continued howling sent familiar chills down Walter's spine, transporting him back to that terrible night in 1998 when everything in his life had changed forever. He could still see the snarling face of the Rottweiler that had appeared out of nowhere as he walked home from his shift at the textile mill. Still feel the terror as powerful jaws clamped down on his arm, tearing through muscle and tendon. Still, remember the weeks in the hospital, the infections, the way his young wife Linda had looked at him differently afterward, like he was somehow broken. "Some things just change you," he muttered under his breath, watching as the rescue team carefully approached the trapped animal. "Some things mark you forever." Walter had tried therapy, medication, even hypnosis, but nothing could erase the deep-seated fear that had taken root in his chest. Over the years, that fear had transformed into something darker, more consuming. It wasn't rational, and somewhere, in the logical part of his mind, he knew that, but knowing and feeling were two very different things. He watched Jake Mitchell circle the German Shepherd, noting the way the young man moved with confidence and purpose. Walter had heard stories about Jake's military service overseas, how he had come back to Millbrook with a Purple Heart and a desire to help his community. It irritated Walter more than he cared to admit. Heroes always made him feel smaller somehow, more insignificant. Sarah Mitchell was talking softly to the trapped dog, her voice carrying a gentleness that Walter found infuriating. Why did people always assume animals deserved such kindness? Where was that compassion when he had been lying in a hospital bed, wondering if he would ever use his arm properly again? Where was the community support when Linda had packed her bags and moved in with her sister in Memphis, unable to cope with his nightmares and sudden mood changes? The ambulance siren that had wailed past minutes earlier was now silent, but Walter knew exactly where it had been heading. Millbrook County Medical Center was where he had spent those horrible weeks recovering, where he had first realized that his life would never be the same. The building held almost as many painful memories as dogs did. Mike Rodriguez was now unpacking specialized cutting tools, each piece of equipment laid out with military precision. Walter noticed how the team worked together seamlessly, communicating with subtle hand signals and shared glances. It was the kind of coordination that came from trust and mutual respect, things Walter had convinced himself were luxuries he couldn't afford. As he continued his surveillance, a plan began to form in Walter's mind. It wasn't elaborate or particularly sophisticated, but it didn't need to be. He knew this property better than anyone, knew every hiding spot and storage area. More importantly, he knew exactly where the rescue team would need to position their truck to get the best access to the trapped animal. The German Shepherd's howling had taken on a different quality now, almost as if the dog sensed that help was near. The sound made Walter's stomach clench with familiar anxiety, but he forced himself to stay focused. This wasn't about rational thought anymore. This was about settling a score that had been building for over 2 decades. Moving with the stealth that came from years of avoiding human contact, Walter slipped away from his observation post and headed toward his maintenance shed. Inside, among the lawn mowers and hedge trimmers, sat a collection of tools and supplies that he had accumulated over the years. Most residents assumed he was simply thorough in his groundskeeping duties, but Walter's true motivation was control. Having the right tool for any situation gave him a sense of power that had been missing from his life since that night in 1998. He selected several items carefully: a battery-powered impact driver, a few strategic bolts, and a coil of rope that looked innocuous enough. Walter had observed enough rescue operations over the years to know their standard procedures. Teams like Jake's were predictable in their efficiency, following protocols that prioritize speed and safety. But protocols could be disrupted, equipment could malfunction, and timing could be thrown off in ways that would seem like simple bad luck. As he gathered his supplies, Walter caught sight of his reflection in the dusty window of the shed. The face, looking back at him, was deeply lined, marked by years of isolation and resentment. His hair had gone completely grey, and his eyes held a hardness that would have been foreign to the younger man he had once been. That man had believed in community, in helping neighbors, in the basic goodness of people and animals alike. But that man had been naive. The sound of truck doors slamming brought Walter back to the present. Through the window, he could see the rescue team beginning their work in earnest. Jake was now wearing heavy gloves and approaching the German Shepherd with wire cutters, while Sarah positioned herself to provide emotional support to the trapped animal. Mike was setting up what looked like a portable stretcher, preparing for the moment when they would finally free their patient. Walter felt a familiar surge of anger watching their careful coordination. Everything seemed so easy for people like them, so straightforward. They saw a problem, they fixed it. They encountered suffering, they relieved it. The world was divided into simple categories of right and wrong, good and bad, worthy and unworthy. But Walter knew better. He had learned that life was far more complicated, far less fair than people like the Mitchell siblings could possibly understand. Sometimes the innocent suffered while the guilty went free. Sometimes good intentions led to terrible consequences. Sometimes the very creatures people rushed to save turned around and destroyed the lives of those who had tried to help. As he stepped out of the shed with his supplies, Walter's resolve hardened. He wasn't going to let this rescue proceed smoothly. Not when every howl from that German Shepherd brought back memories of pain and abandonment. Not when he had the power to remind these would-be heroes that sometimes, despite their best efforts, things just didn't work out the way they planned. The afternoon heat seemed to intensify as Walter began his quiet sabotage, each step calculated to appear accidental, each delay designed to look like simple misfortune. He had become an expert at operating in the shadows, at causing problems without leaving fingerprints. It was a skill born of necessity, refined through years of practice and motivated by a pain that had never properly healed. What Walter didn't know was that his actions were about to set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything. He believed about justice, redemption, and the capacity for healing that exists in the most unexpected places. Jake approached the German Shepherd with the steady confidence of someone who had faced far worse situations in his military career. Overseas, the dog had calmed somewhat, though his amber eyes remained alert and focused on something beyond the immediate circle of rescuers. Every few minutes, the animal would lift his head toward the direction of the hospital, as if listening for something only he could hear. "Easy there, boy," Jake spoke in low, soothing tones as he examined the wire configuration. "We're going to get you out of this mess, but I need you to stay still for me." The barbed wire had created a cruel puzzle around the dog's body. 3 separate strands had wrapped around his torso and legs in a way that suggested he had been struggling for quite some time before the rescue team arrived. Each movement had only tightened the trap, and now Jake could see small spots where the barbs had penetrated the dog's thick coat. "Sarah, can you position yourself on his left side? I need him to focus on something calming while I work on this primary strand here." Jake indicated the wire that seemed to be causing the most restriction around the dog's chest. Sarah moved into position, her years of veterinary training evident in the way she read the animal's body language. "His breathing is elevated but steady. I don't think any of the wires have hit anything vital, but we need to work quickly. He's been under stress for a while." Mike had been setting up the portable stretcher when he noticed something odd. "Hey, Jake, where did you put the bolt cutters? I thought I saw you grab them from the truck." Jake looked up from his careful examination of the wire configuration. "They should be right there in the toolkit, the heavy-duty ones with the red handles." "That's what I thought, but they're not here." Mike's voice carried a note of confusion as he searched through their equipment. "I've got the wire cutters, but for some of these thicker strands, we really need the bolt cutters." A frown creased Jake's forehead. As team captain, he took inventory control seriously. Equipment didn't just disappear, especially not during active rescues. "Are you sure you checked everywhere?" "Positive. I've been through everything twice." Mike's frustration was beginning to show. "Maybe they fell out of the truck during transport." Sarah looked up from her position beside the German Shepherd. "That's strange. I saw you loading them myself this morning when we responded to that. Call about the cat stuck in the storm drain." The dog seemed to sense the tension among his rescuers and began to struggle again, his movements becoming more agitated. Each twist and pull only served to tighten the wire around his body, and Sarah could see fresh spots of blood beginning to appear on his golden coat. "We can't wait for missing equipment," Jake decided. "The wire cutters will have to do. It'll just take longer and require more precise cuts." As Jake began the delicate process of cutting through the first strand, Dr. Patricia Summers was pulling into the parking lot of Millbrook County Medical Center, her heart racing with the urgency of the call she had received 20 minutes earlier. As the chief pediatric specialist in the county, she was accustomed to emergency calls, but something about this particular case had struck her as especially critical. The baby had been brought in by frantic parents who had found their 6-month-old daughter Emma running a dangerously high fever with symptoms that didn't match any standard childhood illness. The emergency room staff had managed to stabilize her temperature somewhat, but her condition remained precarious. Dr. Summers hurried through the automatic doors of the medical center, her mind already running through differential diagnoses and treatment protocols. What she didn't expect was to hear, even from inside the hospital, the distant but persistent howling of what sounded like a large dog in distress. "Dr. Summers, thank goodness you're here," called Nurse Janet Brooks as she approached. "The baby's in examination room 3. We've managed to bring her fever down from 104 to 101, but she's still lethargic and her parents are beside themselves." "What's the background?" Dr. Summers asked as they walked quickly down the hallway. "David and Melissa Chen, first-time parents, very attentive. The baby was fine this morning, normal feeding and play, but around noon she became fussy and her temperature spiked rapidly. No signs of infection, no recent vaccinations, no known exposures." Dr. Summers paused outside the examination room. "And that sound outside? Is that affecting the family?" Nurse Brooks looked puzzled for a moment, then nodded. "Oh, the dog? Yes. It's been going on for about 30 minutes now. Sounds like it's coming from somewhere behind the Henderson property." The baby's father asked about it. He seemed particularly concerned about animal distress calls. Back at the rescue site, Jake had managed to cut through the first strand of barbed wire, but the process was taking much longer than anticipated. The wire cutters, while functional, weren't designed for the thicker gauge wire they were encountering. Each cut required multiple attempts, and the dog was becoming increasingly restless. "This isn't working efficiently enough," Jake muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "At this rate, we'll be here for another hour, and this guy is getting more stressed by the minute." Mike had continued searching for the missing bolt cutters, expanding his search radius around their truck. It was during this search that he noticed something that made him pause. Fresh tire tracks in the soft dirt near the maintenance shed suggested that someone had been moving equipment recently. The tracks were too fresh to have been made during the morning's heat, and they led directly to the area where Walter Hartman stored his groundskeeping supplies. "Jake, I think we might have a problem," Mike called out, his voice carrying a note of concern that made both Jake and Sarah look up immediately. "What kind of problem?" Jake asked, though he continued his careful work on the second strand of wire. "I'm finding evidence that someone might have been moving our equipment. These tire tracks weren't here when we arrived, and they lead straight to that storage shed over there." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the oppressive heat. "You think someone took our bolt cutters deliberately?" "I'm not sure what to think, but missing equipment during a rescue isn't usually coincidental." Mike's military background had taught him to be suspicious of convenient failures and unexpected obstacles. The German Shepherd seemed to understand the conversation, his intelligent eyes moving between the three humans as if he too recognized that something wasn't quite right about their situation. His periodic glances toward the hospital had become more frequent, and his attempts to free himself more urgent. Jake made a decision that would prove to be more significant than he realized at the time. "Mike, go check out that shed. If someone has our equipment, we need to know. Sarah, call Dr. Patterson and see if he can bring some mild sedation for our friend here. We need to keep him calm while we work." As Mike headed toward the maintenance shed and Sarah reached for her phone, none of them noticed the figure watching from behind the rusted fence, his weathered face set in grim satisfaction. Walter had successfully implemented the first phase of his plan, but he had no idea that his actions were about to intersect with a crisis at the hospital in ways that would change multiple lives forever. The afternoon heat continued to build, creating an atmosphere of tension and urgency that seemed to press down on everyone involved. Time was becoming a critical factor, though none of the rescuers yet understood just how important every passing minute would prove to be. In examination room 3 at Millbrook County Medical Center, baby Emma Chen had begun to show signs of increased distress, her small body responding to stresses that the medical team couldn't yet identify. Her parents stood anxiously beside her crib, their world narrowed to the rise and fall of their daughter's labored breathing. And through the hospital windows, the persistent howling of the trapped German Shepherd continued to echo across the community, creating an unexpected connection between two desperate situations that would soon become impossible to ignore. Mike Rodriguez had seen enough combat zones to recognize when someone was trying to cover their tracks. The maintenance shed behind the Henderson property showed clear signs of recent activity, despite Walter Hartman's attempts to make everything appear undisturbed. Fresh footprints in the dusty floor led directly to a corner where several expensive-looking tools sat in suspiciously neat arrangement. "Excuse me," Mike called out, knowing that someone had to be nearby. The shed door had been unlocked and the tools inside were too valuable to leave unattended in an abandoned area. "Is anyone around? We're with the volunteer rescue team." Walter emerged from behind a cluster of overgrown bushes, his expression carefully neutral. "Can I help you with something? I'm just doing some maintenance work back here." Mike studied the older man's face, noting the defensive posture and the way his eyes avoided direct contact. "We're missing some equipment from our rescue truck, heavy-duty bolt cutters with red handles. You haven't seen anything like that around here, have you?" "Can't say that I have." Walter's voice was steady, but Mike caught the slight tension in his shoulders. "Lot of people come and go through this area. Could have been anyone." "The thing is," Mike continued, his tone remaining conversational but his eyes alert, "we had a complete inventory when we arrived, and now we're missing exactly the tool we need most for this particular rescue. That seems like quite a coincidence." Walter shrugged with practiced indifference. "Bad luck happens. Maybe you should double-check your truck again." Mike's instincts told him he was looking at their saboteur, but confronting Walter directly wouldn't help the trapped German Shepherd. Instead, he decided to try a different approach. "You know, that dog has been howling for quite a while now. Sounds like he's in real pain. As someone who works around here, you probably hear a lot of animal sounds. This one seemed different to you." For just a moment, Walter's carefully constructed mask slipped, and Mike saw something raw and painful flash across the older man's features. It wasn't indifference or simple dislike. It was genuine fear, mixed with something that looked almost like grief. "I don't pay attention to animal noises," Walter said quickly, but his voice had lost some of its steadiness. "Got work to do." Mike decided to push a little further. "See, the interesting thing is, we've got a German shepherd trapped in barbed wire, probably been there for hours, and somehow our most essential piece of equipment just happens to go missing right when we need it most. Now, I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but I've seen enough deliberate obstacles in my time to recognize patterns." Walter's jaw tightened, and for a moment Mike thought the older man might actually confess. But instead, Walter turned away and began walking back toward the bushes. "Like I said, can't help you. You should probably get back to your rescue." As Walter disappeared into the vegetation, Mike quickly scanned the interior of the shed. He didn't have legal authority to search the property, but he could observe what was in plain sight. In the back corner, partially hidden under a dirty tarp, he spotted a flash of red that made his pulse quicken. Moving carefully, Mike lifted the edge of the tarp and revealed their missing bolt cutters, along with what appeared to be other tools that didn't belong in a groundskeeper's collection. The bolt cutters still had the inventory tag that Jake insisted on attaching to all their equipment. Mike's first instinct was to confront Walter immediately, but his training told him to focus on the immediate crisis. They had found their equipment, and that was what mattered for the German shepherd's rescue. The questions about Walter's motivations could wait until after they had freed the trapped animal. At Millbrook County Medical Center, Dr. Patricia Summers was facing her own set of escalating complications. Baby Emma Chen's condition had taken an unexpected turn that was baffling her medical team. Despite their efforts to control her fever and provide supportive care, the infant seemed to be responding to some unknown stressor that conventional medicine couldn't identify. "Doctor, her vital signs are stable, but she keeps becoming agitated every few minutes," Nurse Brooks reported. "It's almost like she's responding to something external, but we can't figure out what." Dr. Summers checked Emma's chart again, looking for any detail they might have missed. "What about environmental factors? Room temperature, lighting, noise, levels? We've controlled for all the standard variables. The only thing we can't control is that dog howling outside. It seems to be getting closer to the hospital." David Chen, Emma's father, looked up from where he had been holding his wife's hand. "Doctor, I know this might sound strange, but Emma seems to react more strongly when that howling gets louder. Is it possible that she's somehow responding to the animal's distress?" Dr. Summers paused in her examination. In her 15 years of pediatric medicine, she had seen children respond to stimuli that adults couldn't detect, but she had never encountered a case quite like this one. "It's not impossible. Infants are often more sensitive to emotional atmospheres than we realize, but I've never seen such a strong physiological response to external animal sounds." Melissa Chen spoke up from beside Emma's crib, her voice trembling with exhaustion and worry. "She's always been sensitive to things around her. Even at home, she seems to know when our neighbor's cat is upset or when there are birds in distress outside our window. We thought it was just coincidence, but maybe there's something more to it." Dr. Summers found herself considering possibilities that fell well outside conventional medical training. Has Emma had any unusual interactions with animals? Any particularly strong responses or connections? "Actually, yes," David said, his expression brightening slightly as he remembered something important. "Last month, we took her to visit my parents, and they have an old golden retriever named Buddy. Buddy had been sick for weeks, barely eating, and the vet said there wasn't much hope. But when Emma spent the afternoon there, something changed. Buddy perked up, started eating again, and made a complete recovery. My parents called it a miracle." The pieces of an unusual puzzle were beginning to form in Dr. Summers' mind, though. She was hesitant to voice theories that would sound unscientific. Still, medicine had taught her that sometimes the most effective treatments came from understanding connections that weren't immediately obvious. "I want to try something," She said carefully. It might sound unconventional, but given Emma's apparent sensitivity to animal distress, I think we should consider the possibility that her condition is somehow linked to whatever is happening outside. Back at the rescue site, Mike had returned with the recovered bolt cutters, explaining to Jake and Sarah what he had discovered at the maintenance shed. The news that their equipment had been deliberately hidden created a new layer of tension, but it also meant they could finally make real progress in freeing the German Shepherd. "Someone actually sabotaged our rescue," Sarah's voice carried, a mixture of disbelief and anger. "Who would do something like that?" "The groundskeeper, Walter Hartman. I'm pretty sure he's been working against us from the beginning." Mike began setting up the bolt cutters for the thicker sections of wire. "But I got the impression this isn't just random vandalism. There's something personal driving his actions." Jake accepted this information with the calm focus that had served him well in more dangerous situations overseas. "Right now, let's concentrate on getting this guy free. We can deal with Walter later." The German Shepherd seemed to sense that progress was finally being made. His struggles had calmed somewhat, though his attention remained divided between his rescuers and something in the direction of the hospital. Every few minutes, he would lift his head and release a long, mournful howl that seemed to carry across the entire community. As Jake made the first cut with the bolt cutters, the difference in efficiency was immediately apparent. The thicker wire that had resisted their previous efforts yielded cleanly to the proper tool, and suddenly the rescue that had seemed impossible began to look achievable. "That's it," Sarah encouraged, watching as the first major strand fell away from the dog's body. "We're making real progress now." But even as the physical barriers began to fall away, none of them could have predicted that their successful rescue was about to become part of a larger story that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the connections between human and animal hearts and the mysterious ways that healing could flow between the most unlikely companions. Dr. Patricia Summers stood at the window of examination room 3, watching as another wave of agitation passed through baby Emma Chen. The timing was becoming impossible to ignore. Every time the German Shepherd's howling intensified, Emma's vital signs showed corresponding spikes in stress indicators. It was the kind of correlation that medical school had taught her to document, but not necessarily believe. "Nurse Brooks, I need you to time the next series of episodes," Dr. Summers instructed. "Note exactly when Emma shows distress and see if you can correlate it with the animal sounds outside." Janet Brooks had been a pediatric nurse for over 20 years, long enough to trust doctors who were willing to think outside conventional parameters. She positioned herself with a stopwatch and began monitoring both Emma's responses and the distant howling that continued to echo across Millbrook. "Doctor," David Chen said hesitantly, "I know this might sound crazy, but what if Emma is somehow trying to help that animal, the same way she seemed to help my parents' dog?" Melissa Chen nodded eagerly from beside her daughter's crib. "She gets like this sometimes at home when she hears animals in distress. It's like she can't rest until she knows they're okay. We always thought it was just coincidence, but seeing this..." Dr. Summers found herself considering a possibility that would have seemed absurd just an hour earlier. The research on human-animal emotional connections, especially in very young children, is actually quite extensive. Some studies suggest that certain individuals have enhanced capacity for interspecies empathy. The howling outside suddenly changed in tone, becoming more urgent and desperate. Almost immediately, Emma's heart rate spiked, and she began the restless movements that had been puzzling the medical team all afternoon. "There," Nurse Brooks said, checking her stopwatch. "That's the fourth time in 10 minutes. The correlation is too consistent to be coincidental." Dr. Summers made a decision that would have seemed unthinkable to her conservative medical training just a few years earlier. "I want to try something that might sound unconventional. If Emma is genuinely responding to that animal's distress, then theoretically, resolving the animal's crisis might also resolve Emma's symptoms." "You want to bring her closer to the dog?" Melissa asked, her voice carrying both hope and concern. "Not exactly closer, but I want to create a situation where she can somehow help. If her distress is truly empathetic, then giving her a way to contribute to the solution might calm her own symptoms." David Chen looked skeptical but desperate. "How would that even work? She's 6 months old." "Palidissime. Sometimes healing doesn't require conscious action," Dr. Summers explained, her own words surprising her with their departure from standard medical doctrine. "There are documented cases of therapeutic presence, especially involving children and animals. If Emma has some kind of enhanced empathetic ability, simply being near the rescue might be enough." The conversation was interrupted by Jake Mitchell's voice calling from the hospital parking lot below. Dr. Summers looked out the window to see the rescue team's truck pulling into the hospital's emergency entrance, a large German Shepherd visible in the back. "They're bringing the dog here?" Nurse Brooks asked, moving to the window. "It makes sense," Dr. Summers realized. "We're the closest medical facility, and they probably need a sterile environment to treat any wounds from the barbed wire." Jake's voice carried clearly through the open window as he spoke to his team. "Sarah, call ahead and let them know we're bringing in an injured animal. Nothing life-threatening, but he'll need wound cleaning and probably some antibiotics." What happened next surprised everyone in examination room 3. The moment baby Emma heard Jake's voice announcing that the German Shepherd was being brought to safety, her agitation began to subside. Her heart rate slowed, her breathing became more regular, and for the first time in hours, she seemed genuinely peaceful. "Doctor, look at this," Nurse Brooks whispered, staring at Emma's monitor readings. "Her vitals are normalizing. All of them." Dr. Summers felt a chill of recognition. She knows. Somehow she knows that help is coming for the dog. Meanwhile, in the parking lot below, Jake and his team were carefully transferring the German Shepherd from their truck to a makeshift stretcher. The dog, now freed from the barbed wire but still bearing several minor wounds, seemed remarkably calm given his recent ordeal. His intelligent amber eyes scanned the hospital building as if he was searching for something specific. Sarah wiped her hands on a towel, having completed her initial assessment of the dog's injuries. "He's in better shape than I expected. Most of the wounds are superficial, though they'll need proper cleaning. But Jake, there's something else. Look at how he's behaving." Jake followed her gaze to see the German Shepherd sitting alert and focused, his attention directed specifically toward the third-floor window where Emma's examination room was located. "It's like he knows something we don't." Mike finished securing the stretcher and looked up at the hospital building. "Maybe dogs can sense medical emergencies the same way they can detect seizures or diabetic episodes. I've heard stories about therapy animals being drawn to patients who need them most." As they prepared to bring the German Shepherd into the hospital, Walter Hartman watched from the maintenance shed parking area. His emotions a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and something he couldn't quite identify. His sabotage had failed, the rescue had succeeded, and now he was witnessing exactly the kind of scene that triggered his deepest fears and resentments. But there was something about the way the German Shepherd carried himself, something about The purposeful way he seemed to be approaching the hospital that made Walter's certainty waver. This wasn't the aggressive, unpredictable animal behavior that had shaped his nightmares for over 20 years. This was something entirely different. Dr. Summers made a decision that would have seemed impossible an hour earlier. "I'm going to ask the rescue team if they would be willing to bring the dog up here. If Emma's condition is genuinely connected to his well-being, then the safest place for both of them might be together." "Doctor, are you sure?" Nurse Brooks asked. "Hospital protocol for animals can be modified for therapeutic purposes," Dr. Summers finished. "I've seen stranger interventions work, and right now conventional medicine isn't giving us the answers we need." David and Melissa Chen exchanged glances, the hope in their eyes overriding their natural caution. "If you think it might help Emma," Melissa said softly, "we trust your judgment." As Dr. Summers headed for the elevator to meet the rescue team, Emma Chen settled into the most peaceful sleep she had experienced all day. Her small hand, which had been clenched in agitation for hours, finally relaxed and opened as if she was preparing to reach out and touch something precious. 3 floors below, the German Shepherd continued his patient vigil, his gaze never wavering from the window. Above, as if he too understood that something important was about to happen, the afternoon heat that had made their rescue so challenging was finally beginning to break, and the golden light filtering through the hospital windows seemed to promise that the hardest part of their shared ordeal was nearly over. Walter Hartman remained in the parking lot, torn between his desire to leave and a growing compulsion to see how this unusual story would end. Despite everything he believed about the unpredictable nature of animals, he found himself curious about what would happen when a traumatized German Shepherd met a mysteriously empathetic baby girl. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Dr. Patricia Summers found herself face to face with Jake Mitchell, his sister Sarah, and the most remarkable German Shepherd she had ever encountered. Despite his recent ordeal, the dog carried himself with a dignity and purpose that seemed almost human in its intensity. His amber eyes met hers directly, and she had the strangest sensation that he was trying to communicate something important. "Dr. Summers." Jake's voice carried the respectful tone that most people used when addressing medical professionals. But there was also an urgency that suggested he understood the unusual nature of their situation. "Sarah Mitchell, veterinary technician, and this is the patient we rescued. We understand you have a situation upstairs that might be connected?" "More connected than any of us initially realized," Dr. Summers replied, studying the German Shepherd's alert posture. "The baby I'm treating has been showing distress symptoms that correlate directly with your dog's vocalizations. When you announced his rescue, her condition improved dramatically." Sarah knelt beside the German Shepherd, her trained hands checking his pulse and examining the cleaned wounds from his barbed wire ordeal. "His name is Rex, according to his tags. He's remarkably calm for an animal who just went through such trauma. It's almost like he knows he has somewhere important to be." As if responding to his name, Rex lifted his head and released a soft whine that was entirely different from the desperate howling that had echoed across Millbrook all afternoon. This sound was gentle, questioning, almost conversational in its tone. "He's been doing that since we brought him into the hospital," Mike observed from behind the stretcher, "like he's trying to tell us something." Dr. Summers made her decision. "I'd like to bring him up to meet Emma. I know it sounds unconventional, but I have a strong feeling that these two need to be together." The elevator ride to the 3rd floor was conducted in contemplative silence, broken only by Rex's occasional soft vocalizations. Each sound seemed purposeful, as if he was announcing his arrival to someone who was waiting for him. Dr. Summers found herself marveling at the strange turn her medical practice had taken, but her instincts told her they were moving towards something important. When the elevator doors opened on the pediatric floor, Rex immediately oriented himself toward examination room 3, despite having no logical way of knowing which direction to go. His steps were deliberate and confident, and the rescue team followed with a mixture of amazement and growing anticipation. "Dr. Summers, is everything ready?" Nurse Brooks met them in the hallway, her expression reflecting both professional concern and personal curiosity about the unconventional treatment they were about to attempt. "As ready as we can be for something that has no precedent in medical literature," Dr. Summers replied with a slight smile. "How is Emma responding?" "Still peaceful. Her vitals have remained stable since she heard about the rescue, but she seems to be waiting for something. Her parents are nervous but hopeful." As they approached examination room 3, Rex's behavior became even more pronounced. He began a low, melodious whining that seemed designed to announce his presence without causing alarm. It was the kind of sound a mother might make to comfort a distressed child, gentle and reassuring. David and Melissa Chen looked up as the unusual procession entered their daughter's room. Emma, who had been sleeping peacefully for the first time all day, opened her eyes and immediately focused on Rex with an intensity that made everyone in the room catch their breath. "Oh my," Melissa whispered, watching as her 6-month-old daughter's face lit up with recognition and joy. "Look at her expression. It's like she's been waiting for him." Rex approached Emma's crib with careful deliberation, his movements slow and respectful. When he reached the side of the crib, he sat down and placed his large head against the bars, positioning himself so that Emma could see him clearly. The soft whining continued, but now it had taken on an almost musical quality, like a lullaby. Emma's response was immediate and profound. She began making the soft cooing sounds that 6-month-old babies use when they're completely content, reaching her tiny hand toward Rex's massive head. When her fingers brushed against his fur, something extraordinary happened. The transformation was visible to everyone in the room. Rex's breathing, which had been slightly elevated from stress and pain, immediately settled into a deep, peaceful rhythm. The tension lines around his eyes, evidence of his recent trauma, seemed to smooth away. But even more remarkably, Emma's own breathing synchronized with his, creating a harmony that seemed to fill the room with unexpected tranquility. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" Sarah whispered to Dr. Summers, her veterinary training making her acutely aware of the physiological changes occurring in both the baby and the dog. "Never," Dr. Summers replied, watching Emma's monitor readings with amazement. "Her stress indicators are completely normal for the first time today. It's like Rex's presence is acting as some kind of biological regulator." Jake, whose military experience had taught him to be skeptical of things that couldn't be logically explained, found himself deeply moved by what he was witnessing. "They're communicating somehow. I can't explain it, but there's definitely something passing between them." Emma had managed to wrap her tiny fingers around a tuft of Rex's fur, and she held on with the determination of someone who had found exactly what she had been looking for. Rex remained perfectly still, allowing the baby to maintain contact while continuing his gentle musical whining. David Chen pulled out his phone and began recording, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke. "I have to document this. No one is going to believe what we're seeing here." "David, are you sure?" Melissa asked, though she too was reaching for her phone. "This feels too private, too sacred to share." "Maybe," David replied, "but if this kind of connection is possible, if healing can flow between a baby and a rescue dog, then people need to know. This could change how we think about therapy, about medicine, about the connections between all living things." Dr. Summers found herself nodding in agreement. Medical documentation is important, but more than that, this is a story about hope. In a world that often seems divided and harsh, this moment proves that love and compassion can create healing in ways we're only beginning to understand. Outside the hospital, Walter Hartman had finally worked up the courage to enter the building. His steps were hesitant, his heart pounding with the familiar anxiety that dogs always triggered, but something stronger was pulling him forward. He needed to see what had happened to the German shepherd he had tried so hard to prevent from being rescued. As he reached the third floor, he could hear voices speaking in hushed, reverent tones. Following the sound, he found himself looking into examination room 3, where a scene was unfolding that challenged everything he had believed about animals and their capacity for gentleness. The German shepherd that had terrified him with its desperate howling was now sitting peacefully beside a baby's crib, his presence somehow creating an atmosphere of profound calm and healing. The baby's tiny hand was tangled in the dog's fur, and both seemed completely at peace with the world and each other. Walter's eyes filled with unexpected tears as he watched Rex gently nuzzle Emma's hand, his movements so careful and tender that they seemed to redefine everything Walter thought he knew about the nature of dogs. This wasn't the aggressive, unpredictable behavior that had shaped his nightmares. This was pure, instinctive compassion in its most beautiful form. For the first time in over 20 years, Walter began to wonder if his fears had blinded him to possibilities he had never allowed himself to consider. As he watched Rex and Emma continue their silent communication, he felt something shifting inside his chest, a loosening of the tight knot of resentment and terror that had defined so much of his adult life. The afternoon sun, streaming through the hospital windows, seemed to bless the unusual gathering, creating a golden atmosphere that made the moment feel both miraculous and absolutely natural. In that room, healing was flowing in directions that medical textbooks had never mapped, proving that sometimes the most profound medicine comes not from science, but from the mysterious connections that bind all living hearts together. 1 year later, the story of Rex and Emma had become legend in Millbrook, Tennessee, and far beyond. The video that David Chen had captured in Examination Room 3 had been shared millions of times across social media platforms, but more importantly, it had sparked a movement of compassion and understanding that continued to grow with each passing month. Dr. Patricia Summers stood in the newly constructed therapy wing of Millbrook County Medical Center, watching through large picture windows as Emma Chen, now a healthy and vibrant 18-month-old, played in the specialized garden. With Rex, who had become the hospital's first official therapy dog, the bond between them had only strengthened over the months, creating a partnership that had revolutionized pediatric care throughout the region. Dr. Summers, the delegation from Johns Hopkins is here for the tour, Nurse Brooks announced, her voice carrying a pride that reflected the entire staff's feelings about their pioneering program. "Send them in," Dr. Summers replied, never taking her eyes off Emma and Rex. The toddler was now walking confidently, often using Rex's sturdy frame for support as she explored their special garden. Rex, for his part, seemed to understand his role as both companion and protector, staying close enough to provide assistance while giving Emma the freedom to develop her independence. The visiting medical professionals entered the therapy wing with the mixture of skepticism and curiosity that Dr. Summers had grown accustomed to seeing. The human-animal healing connection that had saved both Emma and Rex still challenged conventional medical understanding, but the documented results were impossible to ignore. The improvement in patient outcomes since we implemented the therapy animal program has exceeded all our projections, Dr. Summers explained to the group. Children who previously required extensive medication and lengthy hospital stays are now showing rapid improvement with minimal pharmaceutical intervention. Dr. James Morrison from Johns Hopkins Medical School observed Emma and Rex through the window, his expression thoughtful. The neurological implications alone are fascinating. How do you explain the synchronization of biological rhythms between different species? Honestly, we can't fully explain it yet, Dr. Summers admitted, but we've learned that sometimes healing doesn't require complete understanding. Sometimes it just requires us to remain open to possibilities we haven't considered before. In the garden, Emma had discovered a butterfly that had landed on Rex's nose. Her delighted laughter carried through the windows, and Rex's tail wagged gently as he remained perfectly still to avoid disturbing the delicate creature. The scene epitomized the gentle patience that had made their partnership so extraordinary. The therapy program had expanded beyond anything Dr. Summers had initially envisioned. Rescue animals from across Tennessee were now being evaluated for their potential as healing companions, and the success stories continued to multiply. Children with autism, elderly patients with dementia, and adults recovering from trauma all seemed to benefit from the carefully matched animal partnerships. Sarah Mitchell had left her position at the veterinary clinic to become the program's full-time animal coordinator, her expertise proving invaluable in identifying and training suitable therapy animals. Her brother Jake had started a non-profit organization focused on rescue operations, specifically designed to identify animals with therapeutic potential. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation had been Walter Hartman's. Walter now served as the head groundskeeper for the therapy wing, his intimate knowledge of plants and growing conditions making him indispensable in maintaining the healing gardens. More importantly, he had become one of Rex's most devoted caretakers, a development that surprised everyone who knew his history. The change hadn't happened overnight. For weeks after witnessing the connection between Rex and Emma, Walter had struggled with emotions he didn't know how to process. The fear that had controlled his life for over 20 years didn't disappear instantly, but seeing Rex's gentle nature day after day had gradually worn away the walls he had built around his heart. Walter was the most resistant to the program initially, Dr. Summers told the visiting delegation as they moved through the facility, but he's also become one of our strongest advocates. Sometimes the people who resist change most strongly are the ones who need it most desperately. Walter was currently in the garden with Emma and Rex, helping the toddler plant small flowers in a section designated for young patients. His weathered hands, once clenched with anger and fear, now moved gently as he showed Emma how to make holes in the soft earth. Rex supervised the activity with the patient attention of a proud grandfather. "Mr. Walter, look!" Emma exclaimed in her developing vocabulary, pointing to a seedling that was already showing its first green shoots. "That's beautiful, Miss Emma," Walter replied, his voice carrying a warmth that would have been unimaginable just a year earlier. "Rex helped you pick a good spot for that one." Rex's tail wagged in acknowledgement, and he gently nuzzled Walter's shoulder in a gesture of affection that the older man had learned to accept and even treasure. The relationship between Walter and Rex had become a powerful symbol of healing and forgiveness within the hospital community. The story of their unusual friendship had been featured in numerous medical journals and news programs, but Walter preferred to keep his interviews focused on the program's benefits rather than his personal transformation. "Some wounds take longer to heal than others," he would always say, "but given enough time and the right kind of love, even the deepest hurts can mend." As the afternoon progressed, families began arriving for the therapy session groups that had become a cornerstone of the program. Children with various medical conditions were paired with specially trained animals, creating partnerships that often produced results that amazed their medical teams. Emma's parents, David and Melissa, arrived for their daily visit, though Emma's medical needs had long since resolved. The family continued to participate in the program, both because of Emma's obvious joy in her relationship with Rex, and because they had become passionate advocates for animal-assisted therapy. It's changed our entire perspective on healing, Melissa told the visiting doctors. We used to think of medicine as something that happened to you, but now we understand it as something you participate in. Emma and Rex taught us that healing is often collaborative. David had documented much of Emma and Rex's journey, creating a video series that had become an educational resource for medical schools and therapy programs worldwide. The most important thing we've learned is that love really is a kind of medicine. It might not cure everything, but it makes the journey toward healing so much more bearable. As the day drew to a close, Dr. Summers found herself reflecting on the unexpected path that had led to this moment. A year ago, she had been a conventional pediatrician focused on traditional treatment methods. Now, she was at the forefront of a movement that was changing how the medical community understood the connection between emotional well-being and physical health. The final scene of the day was one that never failed to move everyone who witnessed it. As visiting hours ended, Emma's goodbye ritual with Rex had become a moment of pure magic. The toddler would wrap her small arms around Rex's neck, and he would rest his massive head against her tiny shoulder. They would stay that way for several minutes, both seeming to draw strength and comfort from their connection. "See you tomorrow, Rex," Emma would always whisper, her voice barely audible, but filled with absolute certainty that their friendship would continue. Rex's response was always the same gentle whine that had first announced his presence in the hospital, a sound that now carried promises of tomorrow, rather than cries of distress. As the Chen family prepared to leave, Walter finished his evening rounds of the garden, ensuring that all the plants were properly watered and cared for. Rex waited patiently beside him, the two unlikely friends sharing a companionable silence as they completed their daily routine. "You know, Rex," Walter said softly, scratching behind the dog's ears. "A year ago, I never would have believed that. An old man like me could learn new ways of living, but you and Emma taught me that it's never too late to let love change everything." Rex's tail wagged in response, and Walter could swear he saw understanding in those intelligent amber eyes. The story of Rex and Emma had become more than just a medical case study or a heartwarming news story. It had become proof that healing could flow in unexpected directions, that love could bridge species barriers, and that sometimes the most profound medicine came not from laboratories, but from the simple willingness to remain open to miracles. Their legacy lived on in every child who found comfort with a therapy animal, every elderly patient who discovered renewed joy through animal companionship, and every person who learned that healing was not just about fixing what was broken, but about discovering connections that made wholeness possible. As the golden Tennessee sunset painted the therapy wing in warm light, Rex and Emma's story continued to unfold, one gentle moment at a time, proving that some bonds transcend all boundaries and that love, in its purest form, really could heal the world. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Rex and Emma has touched your hearts and opened your minds to the incredible healing power of love and connection. This tale of an unlikely friendship between a rescued German shepherd and a sensitive baby girl reminds us that miracles can happen in the most unexpected ways, and that sometimes the medicine we need most can't be found in any pharmacy. If this story has moved you, we invite you to join our community by subscribing to our channel and giving this video a thumbs up. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that celebrate the profound connections between humans and animals, and the healing that becomes possible when we open our hearts to unconventional possibilities. We'd love to hear your own stories of healing, hope, and unexpected connections in the comments below. Have you experienced the therapeutic power of animals in your own life? Do you believe in the kind of miraculous healing that Rex and Emma discovered together? Share your thoughts and experiences with our community. Every day, we bring you new stories that explore the beautiful complexity of life, love, and the bonds that unite all living beings. Don't miss our upcoming content by hitting that notification bell. And remember that in a world that can sometimes feel divided, stories like Rex and Emma's remind us that love truly knows no boundaries. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey, and we'll see you in our next story, where healing, hope, and unexpected miracles continue to unfold.